Hey, this is Bond Diesel, and today I want to bring you my thoughts and maybe a little bit of discussion on the first year of Division 2. 1 year later, I am recording this on March 15th of 2020, which is the 1 year anniversary-ish of Division 2 releasing. We just got the Warlords of New York expansion. We have a year of the game behind us, and I kind of just want to talk about where we're at, where we were, and where we might be going with the game. Okay, so 1 year ago, technically a couple days earlier for some people, Division 2 came out, and for all intents and purposes, it came out extremely well. I've argued that I believe on release in this genre, so between Destiny and obviously Anthem, of all of these types of games, Division 2 had the best release of all of them. And I say that because there was some semblance of endgame, there was a good amount of content when it came out, and in theory there were things to do once you were quote unquote done with the story. Now, bear with me. I understand that there's some asterisks that come with that. And so people played through. If you go back and if you look at all of the reviews and stuff like that from the bigger companies, you'll find that this game was reviewed really well. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Even today, if you listen to podcasts and things like that, if you hear people talk about Division 2, whether it's brought up in the same breath as Destiny or other games, or just live games in general, there is a positive outlook. Even though there were some bugs, some really significant ones, especially sound issues when the game released, there was still a good feeling for most people. We just found out recently that in 2019, Division 2 was one of the top 10 grossing games in the industry. It made, I believe it was $320 million last year, which is bonkers. That's extremely good money. They don't make budgets, production budgets for games public, at least not that I'm aware of, but I have to imagine that at least doubled up what they spent on the game, and maybe more. So, from a on paper perspective, Division 2's release was incredible and did really well. We had an update come out not long after release, which was Tidal Basin. The thing about Division 2 was when it released, you played through the story, you did all the things, and then what was introduced was the Black Tusk invasion that added to the story, that changed up the way the game played, and at first that was supposed to be like the in-game activity. And overall, I think it was pleasantly received, but it didn't have maybe the longevity for the more serious players that maybe everyone hoped for. And then that's when people, I think, started to look forward to the episodic content. So what we found out with Division 2 was that there would be 3 free episodes of DLC content. And what was interesting about this, especially in hindsight, was that they announced in episode 1, 2, and 3 at E3 in 2019. They showed a trailer for episode 3, which was a CG trailer confirming that we were heading back to New York City, to Coney Island specifically. And what was interesting about episode 1, 2, and 3 is that they were going to be free. They weren't going to split up the player base. And in Division 1, when it came out, everyone, I think it was kind of looking to that for what they may do for the year 1 of Division 2. In year 1 of Division 1, we got things like Survival, fan favorite, Underground, another fan favorite, even Last Stand, the PvP mode, which a lot of people liked and have still been asking for with Division 2. And what was interesting, especially in hindsight, is that with this episodic content, they didn't really give us any information. And what happens, especially in this community, but just with people in general, is that if you don't give them tangible information, they'll make it up. So people, even including myself, really let their imaginations run wild with the episodic content. And honestly, even myself got super hyped about it. I was certain. So we found out that episode 1 was going to be the outskirts of DC. Had some cool concept art. Episode 2 would be the Pentagon, the last castle. And then episode 3, we found out at E3, was going to be the Coney Island expansion. So for me, I thought the Outskirts update was going to be a survival mode, for sure. It just seemed obvious that that's what it was going to be. And then the Pentagon, I just, it's literally one of the biggest, most complicated office buildings in the world. So it was definitely going to be underground. And then the Coney Island, I really wasn't sure. I thought maybe it was going to be like a battle royale type of thing. And that's what we knew. We knew that 3 episodes were coming. We knew that there would be some updates in the middle with new guns and some new activities and stuff like that. And then time went on. People got a little bit bored with the base content. They kind of got sick of doing invasions over and over. And I think everyone was really looking forward to episode 1. I remember myself making videos and podcasts and talking about, like, man, I really hope this is like a survival type mode, because that will give us something to do that's more repeatable than what we have now. So then episode 1 neared, and the PTS released. And unfortunately, the truth of the episodic content was kind of revealed, and we just maybe didn't quite know it yet. We basically found what was a couple new missions, a couple new classified assignments for people who bought the season pass, and some new specialization stuff. And episode 1 did have the expedition at Kenley College, but even that got to a point where people, I think, were expecting something, and they got something very different. It essentially ended up, and I mean this in my opinion, that it was essentially a 3-part busy work simulator that ended with getting an exotic gun that for some reason had a snake wrapped around a lever action rifle, because reasons. And the reason that I am personally a little bitter about this is that the complete lack of communication and transparency about what these updates were going to be led people to speculate and think of ideas that they wanted, which many of them ended up were probably a lot cooler than what we got, which then led to a big letdown and kind of an underwhelming feeling about the content, especially the expedition. And it was kind of it was a tough point. And then what happened was, with episode 2, I was still holding hope personally that the underground was going to be, coming to the Pentagon, and that's what it was going to be. It's like, oh, that first episode, it was just the first thing. The next one's going to be awesome. And then episode 2 came out, and we found that it was 2 missions, a couple classified assignments, and new specialization. And then, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, triple shame on me. I really thought that episode 3 was going to be a lot different. Now, we'll talk more about that, because episode 3 did end up being something a little bit different. But going back to the episodes in general, I really just think that people expected more, especially because Division 1 offered so much in its first year. Really, that's everything it ever offered. Year 2 and 3 of Division 1, added things, but not really, nothing to the same level as year 1. And there was a lot of blaming and thoughts in the community that I noticed that the DLC being free in that year 1 was a big culprit for the lack of complexity and how interesting the content was. And a lot of people took a hiatus. They left, and I still, even now, remember seeing people talk about, like, oh, I'll come back when they have their 1.4, 1.8 equivalent patches. A lot of people, with Division 1 still look back at those patches as like what made them love Division 1. And people were waiting on that for Division 2. Now, that said, I do think it's worth at least mentioning that while I think the episode 1, 2, and 3 content was super underwhelming, and should have been communicated much better, I believe that episode 1, 2, and 3 should have been communicated before the game even came out as, hey, these free episodes, they're going to be 2 new story missions, these huge giant story missions. They're going to be classified assignments for people who have the year 1 pass. They're going to be specializations. There's going to be new guns and gear and exotics and all kinds of cool stuff. And that's what the episode 1, 2, and 3 are going to be. I think initially people would have said, okay. But then I think as they actually came out, people would have enjoyed them because they wouldn't have had these crazy ideas that they made up themselves about what the content was going to be. And then they would have been happier with what we got. But instead, we got what we got. So that led to a lot of talk, from really the release of the game, but especially, a year later now, of people talking about the year one pass, being kind of upset that they even got it, feeling like it wasn't quite worth it. At the end of the day, the year one pass essentially ended up being early access to the new content, the episodes, which a lot of people felt was somewhat underwhelming. Access to the classified missions, which I think one of the classified missions was really, really good. The NSA one. The rest of them were fine. And that was about it. And obviously, instant access to the specializations and stuff. But there's even still people who are upset about the year one pass that they didn't get extra stash space. Before the game came out, that was one of the bonuses that was teased. And then they pulled back on it because of concerns about pay to win accusations. I still think that the small subset of people who are mad about the stash space don't come anywhere near the number of people who would have been mad about paying for stash space. But that's neither here nor there. That's all hindsight and speculation. And then with the episode 1, 2, and 3, what I think was kind of lost by some people was that up to this point, PvP in the Division, it's there. It's in the DZ. It's in Conflict. Before Division 2 came out, there was a lot of talk and focus on Conflict especially. But even the DZ to a point. And right after the game came out, there were changes and things like that they were kind of trying to figure out this new rogue system. Conflict was, it seemed like they were trying to take it more seriously. But as time has kind of gone on, it's been kind of a silence is deafening type of deal with PvP. They have tried to do some balancing, and Warlords, they did do a few things, which we'll talk about, but there's really been like a new conflict mode, which obviously we don't have the numbers, but I can't assume, or I can't imagine that Conflict has a very big player base. And it's really been kind of radio silence on that end of the game. And I think that's something that I personally don't care. I have for a long time felt that, just from the writing on the wall from Division 1 and Division 2, that people who are expecting Division to be their PvP fix, I think are barking up the wrong tree. But even despite that, regardless of that, I do feel bad for the people who have kind of stuck through and who really want it to be something that it's not really appearing that it's ever going to be. So, episode 3 neared, and go figure, we barely have any information about it. We know it's in Coney Island. Some people are speculating. Again, we're back to this whole deal of there's not much information, so people are filling in their own blanks. There's some people who are speculating it's going to be the whole Division 1 map, that we're getting the first DZ back, that it's going to be all of that. Some people think it's going to be the Brooklyn map again and some missions. And then some people are saying that it's just going to be 2 new missions and some classified assignments and new specialization. And I'll admit my own guilt in that I said, no, this 3rd episode, it's the end of the first year. They're going to just wipe everyone with it, and look how amazing this is. And then they had a stay of the game, and they announced that episode 3 was going to be 2 new missions, 2 classified assignments, and a new specialization. And egg was on my face. Kind of. So this was when, shortly after they talked about episode 3, there was a lot of like winky winks and smiles and kind of like a weird attitude about the state of the game, which honestly I think frustrated a lot of people. I understand, I think people need to understand, and like I do, that Ubisoft's a big giant company. When their development studios like massive have news that they can or want to give out, it goes through a whole bunch of layers of approvals and things like that. But I think one thing that has been consistent through the entire series with Division is that on their side, they think it's cute to like tease us with information, where on the consumer side it's super frustrating to not just get good information that still doesn't spoil what's coming. But after a short wait, we essentially found out that episode 3 was basically going to be a prologue into the first big expansion in the Division franchise that would come in the form of Warlords of New York. It was going to cost $30 to upgrade. It was going to cost a little more if people wanted to buy the game as well. And that it was going to be this first big expansion that we've ever had. We've talked a lot about Warlords. I assume if you're watching this video, you've heard more about it. So I'm not going to go into super detail. But basically, they revealed it was going to be a big story campaign, like a legit normal story campaign, just like when the game first came out, that would take place in Lower Manhattan, that would have you going after these rogue agents and culminating with this final standoff with the Division 1 villain, Aaron Keener, who we had only heard a little bit from through the second game. I won't do any big spoilers. I feel like there's probably still people who haven't played or haven't finished the story, but I will say I really enjoyed this campaign. I thought the Warlords of New York campaign was excellent. I honestly will say that at this point I may have enjoyed the Warlords of New York campaign more than I enjoyed the campaign of Division 1 or 2. And I think especially the Kajika rogue hunt was probably my favorite. That mission is really cool. If you haven't played it yet, I highly suggest it. So then what we found after completing the Warlords campaign, we were basically shown this whole new end game for the game. That they essentially, I would say, rebooted the Division 2 with a new gear, gun, and loot system, new activities. The end game worked differently. There's a new faction, which for spoiler purposes I won't go into too deeply, but basically they reset the entire game for all intents and purposes. There were some issues. So when Warlords dropped, PC players basically couldn't get in. Console players were supposed to have to wait until midnight in their local region. That didn't happen. They were all immediately given access to the game after the patch. And the impression I've gotten is that for the most part, everyone really enjoyed the campaign. It took me about 10 hours. I think that seems like about the average for a lot of people. And like the idea of all of the changes they did, but unfortunately in kind of classic gaming fashion, the implementation wasn't perfect. And even today, we're still dealing with a lot of issues. There have been bugs. There's been numerous ones, including issues with things not, the mission's not working right, talents and gear sets not working correctly, some talents not working at all. And there has been, there was a honeymoon period, and now we're back to kind of the normal complaining community that we typically have. Some for good reason and some for not. But the main complaint that I feel like is a topic is the difficulty, and the way that they've kind of scaled the game and tuned the game to be very different than it was before. Where before, with Title Update 7 and before Warlords, you could essentially solo speedrun challenging missions, and that's not the case anymore. My take on it is that at the hard level, and especially playing solo, I think the game feels pretty good. I have a few like solid builds, if not like really good ones. But I will say that the group scaling seems super off, because even at the hard level, I tried to matchmake the bunker mission with 3 other randoms, and even at the hard level, they weren't exactly the best players on earth, but it was a mess. And that might not be the right way to handle this. I understand there's a part of the community who wants a super serious and hardcore experience from Division 2, but similar to like the raid conversations that happened back when the raid came out, it seems that there's a few people who have these really reliable groups and clans and friends that they can play with, and maybe they don't really understand the plight of people who want to play solo, or who have to play solo, or are forced into playing into matchmade groups, and how that doesn't work very well, and it is probably a majority of the player base. Personally, I see Division 2 as a really casual game and a casual experience that most people play casually, and that the ramp up of difficulty just doesn't feel good as it stands today. Despite the fact that a lot of really awesome changes have come to the game and new additions and other things, that overall I think that this patch has been 95% great, but that 5% is rough. I don't expect the game to hand me anything. I think that's the way most people feel. I think there's things like the heroic and legendary difficulties aren't for everyone, and those are really good places for those people who want to get super sweaty. But making it feel sweaty even at pretty low difficulties isn't gonna be a way to like reward your community. And even though there's some people who are pretty vocal about liking the way it is, I am really curious to see how the upcoming tuning that they talked about in the last day of the game is going to impact everything. So with the future of the game and kind of where I think we stand, I really think Division 2, despite some of these issues, is in the best place. It's put the game and the franchise in the best place it's probably ever been. While obviously that sentiment may not be agreed to, I do warn people not to take the noise they see on social media as a voice for the many, as really it seems to act as a loudspeaker for the vocal minority. There's a lot of things that need to be worked on, and PvP desperately needs some love. But I really still think that with things coming like the new raid, the seasons seemingly being pretty great content, I think that there's a lot to look forward to. I will say with the seasons, I think the manhunt system is kind of underwhelming. I finished the first part that's currently available. It kind of was just kind of a fluff once I finished it, but it was still fun to do. And then the wait time in between the different rogues is going to be kind of frustrating as time goes on. But I really do still hold to my idea that, you know, the best case scenario for this game, and really games in general, is to try to make 2/3 of your community happy. This game will never make everyone happy in the community. There's just people with too many different desires and too many different, you know, wants from this game, and you're just never gonna be able to, you know, kind of coalesce that. I do believe that the bones of Division 2 are the best they've ever been. I just really hope that they can continue to move towards that ideal and maybe not take as many steps back as we seem to. Personally, I'm really excited to see what they have in store for us. There's still things to be handled, such as the castle settlement, the Black Tusk leadership and who is in charge there, trying to find out who the hunters and the underground and the ambusher factions are, as well as probably other stories I've forgotten about, or stories that we haven't even heard about yet. What we're going to do with the viral, you know, the bioreactor and Chernenko, and how those things are going to work out. I think that it is not completely inappropriate to wonder if there's going to be a Division 3 announcement, say a year from now, or if they're going to try to continue expanding on Division 2. I'm curious to how the new consoles are going to impact the game, and I think it's going to be an interesting journey. I'm excited to be around, to keep making videos and podcasts, and I hope you are excited to stick around and listen to my 25-minute rants about the game. I hope in a year from now I can do it again, and we can talk about where the game is at then, and I'm really excited to maybe even listen back to this video. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this thing up. I do appreciate it if you made it all the way to the end of this video. This is just kind of more of a short podcast than anything. If you want to support my podcast or my other content, such as these videos, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. That is my Division 2 podcast. Check out the EchoCast on all podcast platforms, including iTunes, Anchor, and Spotify. I am Bondiesel on Twitch, where I try to stream a couple times a week. I am also at Bondiesel on Twitter, where you can follow me on there for some reason. That is all I have, so until next time.
1, 2, 3, jump!